Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this edition of Leak Project. I am your host, Rex Bear, and we have Robert Hastings with us, who has spent more than 40 years researching and seeking information of UFOs. He has interviewed former and retired U.S. Air Force personnel regarding their direct or indirect involvement in nuclear weapons-related UFO incidents. These individuals, ranging in rank and position, report extraordinary encounters which have obvious national security implications. In fact, taken to their logical conclusion, these cases have planetary implications given the horrific consequences that would result from a full-scale global nuclear war. To date, Hastings has interviewed more than 150 military veterans who were involved in various UFO-related incidents at U.S. missile sites, weapons storage facilities, and nuclear bomb test ranges. These events were described by these individuals leave little doubt that the U.S. nuclear weapons program is an ongoing source of interest to someone possessing vastly superior technology. Now, on September 27, 2010, Hastings hosted the UFO Nukes Connection press conference at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., during which 7 U.S. Air Force veterans discussed UFO incursions at nuclear weapons sites during the Cold War era, and CNN even streamed this event live. Now, the full-length video is available at ufohastings.com. It's awesome to have you on the show with us, Robert, here at the Leak Project. How the heck are you?
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Now, we're going to pick your brain as much as we can here over the next 60 minutes. I first found out about UFOs hovering over missile silos and turning off their facility, essentially, about 5 years ago. I found some stuff on the web about it. So this is fascinating to me. The official story was these discs came over this facility and then all of a sudden it turned off, but they didn't really give any other details. So this is going to be really great to find out more about this. But if you would, please tell our audience just a little bit about yourself, and then we'll segue into the work.
My father was career Air Force, and in 1966-67, we lived at Malmstrom Air Force Base, Montana, which is a nuclear missile base. He worked in a facility called the Sage Building, which was basically state-of-the-art radar, connecting with other radar installations around the U.S. that would technically try to prevent Soviet aircraft incursions in North America if, in fact, World War III began. In any case, these very sophisticated radars were picking up unknown aerial objects in the spring of 1967. According to the radar personnel, these objects were flying at enormous velocities. They were doing zigzag maneuvers. They were occasionally stopping and hovering in midair, things that no aircraft can do even today. And beyond that, apparently the targets correlated with missile sites. These unknown aerial objects were hovering above underground nuclear missile silos. This was a very pervasive rumor among personnel at the Sage Building. I heard the rumor from my father. I was aware that something odd was going on, but we didn't quite know what. It was technically classified. However, in 1973, after I left college, I graduated from university, there was information published for the first time by a man named Raymond Fowler, a UFO researcher who also happened to be working for the Minuteman missile program via the Sylvania Corporation. And Fowler published information in a book called Interplanetary Visitors, in which he said his contacts at Malmstrom Air Force Base were telling him, as the Minuteman project manager at Sylvania Corporation, that UFOs were hovering over the missiles and the missiles were malfunctioning. That, in essence, not only confirmed what I had heard back in '67, but took it a step further, indicating not only were these objects flying around and hovering above the missiles, but according to Fowler, they in fact were impacting the functionality of the missiles. So quite quickly, I concluded this was very real, this was very important. I began voluntarily just actively seeking out former military personnel, veterans, to see if anyone else could corroborate these kinds of stories that we were hearing. And over time, through the course of the '70s, I successfully interviewed probably close to 30 former and retired Air Force missile personnel who were describing incidents that they were personally involved in, either as security personnel or missile maintenance personnel, in some cases missile targeting personnel, missile launch personnel, all of whom said this indeed has been going on, not only at Malmstrom, but other missile bases, where the security guards at ground level report a saucer-shaped object racing in at blinding speed, instantaneously stopping and hovering over either one of these launch control capsules or one of the 10 missile silos that those capsules control, and seconds later, the missiles begin malfunctioning. Documents have now been released through the Freedom of Information Act to a number of researchers, which confirm that these incidents have in fact occurred, that there are UFO incursions at nuclear facilities of all kinds, according to the documents, extending back to the 1940s and continuing even to the present day. And I obviously think this is important because I believe the public needs to know the facts. I've spent 35 years on the college lecture circuit trying to acquaint people with this. I've written a 600-page book, which is available at ufohastings.com, summarizing the tape-recorded testimony of over 150 former Air Force personnel that I've interviewed, presenting the documents as well. And most recently, we've completed a documentary film, which is available at Vimeo On Demand, called UFOs and Nukes, The Secret Link Revealed. That is the latest effort on my part to acquaint the public with all of this information.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the book right now, UFOs and Nukes, Extraordinary Encounters at Nuclear Weapons Sites. And the amount of information that you've compiled is just incredible. One thing that I've wondered before is how far back do these sightings, when was the first sighting they had over one of these facilities?
Well, a year after my book was published in 2008, I was contacted by a U.S. Navy veteran. He's a former fighter pilot in World War II. And he told me that his squadron was posted at a place called Naval Air Station Pasco in Washington State. Across the river from that naval facility was the Hanford site, which was the plutonium production facility for the first atomic bombs. The test in New Mexico, the Trinity test, the first detonation of an atomic bomb. The plutonium for that explosion came from the Hanford site, as did the plutonium for the Nagasaki bomb. The Hiroshima bomb, on the other hand, was made from uranium. In any case, this Navy pilot named Bud Clem told me in 2009 that over approximately a 1-month period in January of 1945, several months before the end of the war, several months before Japan was bombed with the 2 atomic bombs, this man was saying that there were 3 separate UFO incursions at the Hanford site, and his squadron was assigned to, in effect, chase these objects away from this very sensitive top secret site. Now, this was prior to the era of jet aircraft. They were flying prop-driven planes, Hellcat fighters, as they were called. And he went into great detail, first on audio tape, and later I actually got him on videotape, describing all of this. In 2013, another researcher named Jan Aldrich was able to get documents from the 4th Army Group during World War II, based in the Northwest, and they confirmed, indeed, in January of 1945, precisely when Bud Clem said this all took place, the Army was picking up 3 unknown aerial objects, 1 object at a time, on 3 separate dates in January of 1945, maneuvering near the Hanford site. So even before the end of World War III, the end of World War II, we had the situation where the UFO phenomenon was expressing a very clear interest in nuclear weapons and was visiting our facilities.
Were there more sightings during specific eras, like with the Cold War, than there are now, or is it something that's been pretty consistent throughout the ages?
It's really difficult to quantify the situation. It's difficult to say how many incidents took place in a given era at a given location, simply because all of this is still very highly classified. If it were not for the few documents that have been released through the Freedom of Information Act, we wouldn't have a record of this kind of activity, UFO incursions at nuclear weapon sites, or if I had not sought out and interviewed these military veterans, we would really not have a good sense that this was going on. But the way that I have to proceed is really to learn of a veteran or have a veteran contact me who allegedly was involved in one of these incidents. My next step is to get their military records, what's called a DD-214, to confirm that they were indeed in the military at the facility they said they were working at the time, to verify at least that much of their story. And once that's been established, they were in fact at the space at a given time frame, then their testimony is taken and we try to correlate it with other incidents that occurred at that base or other bases during the same time frame. But it's catch as catch can, unfortunately. I have to hear of a veteran, locate a veteran, get them on the record, or they have to hear of me and make some contact on their own. So we can't systematically say how many incidents took place at a given base during a given time frame, during a given era. All I can tell you is that, according to Bud Clem, this Navy pilot whom I mentioned a moment ago, we know that incidents were first taking place during World War II at atomic facilities. The latest one that I can establish beyond a reasonable doubt took place October 23rd, 2010, up at F.E. Warren Air Force Base in Cheyenne, Wyoming. There was a massive communication disruption. The base could not communicate with 5 of these underground launch capsules. A total of 50 missiles were impacted. These 5 capsules controlled a total of 50 nuclear missiles. For what the Pentagon claims was approximately an hour, 59 minutes, the base could not reach these underground facilities. In other words, the implication was if suddenly, President Obama had said, the Soviets or the Russians rather are attacking us, we need to launch these missiles, the base could not directly communicate with these facilities underground. Now, when I heard about this incident, I thought there was probably a 50-50 chance that, in fact, there was something UFO related going on, simply because of the track record, the ongoing history that I've been uncovering. So in December of 2010, 2 months after this incident took place, I made an inquiry of a retired missile targeting technician named John Mills. He made some inquiries of active duty personnel he was in touch with at the base, who confirmed to him that indeed there were UFO sightings during this communication disruption. What we have from 2 separate then active duty, now retired missile maintenance personnel was that when this communications disruption occurred, and lasted actually 25 hours, much longer than the Pentagon will admit. These technicians said that maintenance teams were returning from the missile field. When they got back to the base, they were independently reporting over approximately a 25-hour period that there were sightings of a giant cigar-shaped object moving silently through the air at various locations within this very large missile field outside of F.E. Warren Air Force Base. And all of this was taking place precisely at the time that the base was having these communication problems. I suspect there was a direct correlation, and proving that would be another matter. Any assessment that the military did, the Air Force did about all of this certainly is still classified, and I won't expect to see it anytime soon.
Have you heard of the Battle of L.A.? And I'm not referring to the movie.
I'm aware of the incident, yes. I believe in early 1942,
Yep.
where an unknown aerial object was sighted above Los Angeles, and artillery batteries were firing on it. I don't really know much more about it than what's appeared in the literature, but I do know that all of the theories that the skeptics have proposed to explain that away really fall short. They clearly had a target on radar. They clearly were aiming and firing on it with our artillery. And they're clearly, in even one photograph, you see an object caught in several spotlights. It's hard to see because it's highly reflective. Its shape, whatever shape it was, but clearly there was some physical object in the air that the artillery was targeting. Nothing was shot down. Whatever it was either escaped from any direct hits or was impervious to direct hits. We don't really know, but there seemed to be something bona fide UFO involved with that particular case, yes.
Right, and the reason I brought it up is I'm looking at the actual news article from the Los Angeles Times, 1942, just like you said, right on the money, and you can see all these spotlights that are on this craft, and they were shooting at the thing for hours, and they couldn't get it down. And there's another picture to the right of it where you can see the car that's been shot up from some of the bullets that probably bounced off it and hit the car, and just fantastic that this is still available for us to take a look at. You wouldn't find this in an article today in the LA Times. They would just suppress it immediately. So you find some of these hidden gems occasionally, and I wonder if it's the same craft that goes over these missile silos.
Well, the first missiles were deployed in the early 1960s, so we're talking about, a 20-year gap between those incidents, the first missile case incidents and the one that you're describing in LA. So it would be hard to make a direct correlation, but again, what people at the missile silos in the early 1960s were describing were largely saucer-shaped craft. In some cases, they were cylindrical or spherical, but the majority of them were apparently disc-shaped. And I believe I've seen eyewitness testimony from the LA case of what someone was describing as apparently a saucer-shaped object. But again, from that photograph, really the only physical evidence that's available today, I think from looking at it, it's difficult to discern its actual shape.
So the people that have seen these craft that you've interviewed, the many people that you've interviewed, they haven't all came up with like a sketch or anything to say this was round, square, diamond-shaped or whatever?
Some of them, have provided sketches. There are actually depictions in some of the declassified documents of what appear to be a saucer-shaped object with a dome. But those are rare. I mean, the witnesses who are describing these craft are saying the object was there for a matter of seconds. It was almost, it was very difficult to try to register its actual shape, but it did appear to be saucer-shaped. It did hover. It was very bright, and it raced away. It arrived in the blink of an eye, and it raced away in the blink of an eye. So the duration of the sighting is always described as very, very brief. The thing to remember, too, is that the eyewitness accounts come from the security personnel at these missile sites. The actual launch officers are 60 feet underground in the launch capsule. They do not have an opportunity to see these craft with their eye. What they are getting instead, as they're at their launch consoles, they get a telephone call from one guard or more guards, more than one guard at ground level, usually panic-stricken, screaming into the phone, sir, there's a large round object hovering over the front gate. And many of these officers have told me they were about to ask the guard, what have you been drinking, or, what are you saying? I mean, it was such an incredulous kind of situation. And before they could actually get a response from the guard, the missiles began malfunctioning. On their console, they saw one after the other of the 10 missiles dropping off alert status, as the Air Force calls it, meaning that they were unlaunchable. And, seconds after that happens, the guard screams into the phone, "It left the scene, sir, it's gone, it raced away." It's all very quick. But then, almost without exception, the two launch officers who are involved in a given case are debriefed, usually by what's called an OSI, Office of Special Investigations agent. It's an Air Force counterintelligence group. Those persons are asked to describe what they witnessed. The OSI agent takes down their account and then presents them with what's called a national security non-disclosure statement, which basically says that if you sign this and then subsequently talk about it to anyone, including the person who was in the launch capsule with you, the other officer, if you talk to anyone about this, you're subject to 10 years in jail and a $10,000 fine. Very serious penalties for discussing these cases publicly. They're classified either secret or top secret. Many of these witnesses wait decades, most of them wait decades before they feel they can talk to me or the media about this publicly without sort of having repercussions. I've had people who I've encountered, it takes them 5 years before they're willing to go on the record, go on camera, go on audio tape, and describe what they're telling me verbally or in an email. So even decades later, these veterans are concerned that the FBI is going to knock on their door, or suddenly there'll be problems with them getting their retirement pay, or what have you. And the 150 veterans that I've interviewed, it's closer to 160 now, not one of them over the years has had any kind of difficulties with the Air Force or the FBI from talking about this. But the government uses that card, the fear that they instill in these persons way back when these incidents took place, that you will never, ever, ever talk about this. And that prevents many witnesses from coming forward.
Well, certainly, if you're in the military and you get threatened with a decade in prison and all that other stuff, I can certainly see why there's probably so many people out there that have just amazing information to give to people, but because of that, who knows what'll happen. So one of the things, too, that I've wondered is with the technologies that we have now, you would think that there's probably some type of video footage or camera system set up around these silos, so if something was to get close to them, they could just start taking pictures and get footage automatically. Have you ever looked into possibly finding those types of images?
I don't know what the Air Force is doing these days, but during all of the era, the Cold War era, when the majority of these incidents were taking place, there were no camera systems. And why that is, why the Air Force does not want to try to capture these objects on camera, or even just, intruders of any kind, at these missile sites, I'm not sure why they don't have cameras, but they don't. Many, many times people around the world, when they report the presence of a UFO, electronic equipment malfunctions. So even if the government, even if the Air Force had cameras, it's conceivable that when these objects are present, anything electronic would malfunction.
Yeah, that makes sense. I could see how they would be one step ahead in that regard. Now, when you talk to these military personnel that have been in the Air Force and others, I mean, what is their energy like when you speak with them? Are they nervous? Do they think that they're going to get ridiculed?
Well, most of these guys are now in their 70s and even 80s. They're so concerned about going public. They've waited decades to talk to me or someone like me. Some of the security guards I've interviewed, of course, are younger people who worked in the Air Force in the 80s and 90s. They're in their 40s and 50s. I've actually even interviewed a couple of security guards who are in their late 20s. They're not even 30. But those are rare. Most people don't want to talk about this until they're older and they feel that their career, whatever that career is, not going to be impacted by going public with something they were told to keep quiet about. But the older gentlemen who've talked about incidents in the 60s and 70s, they're emphatic. They say, I don't care what the skeptics say. The armchair experts, I was there. I know what happened. We lost power to, we had malfunctioning missiles that took us 24 hours to get back online. That occurred precisely at the time security guards were telling me there were UFOs hovering over one or more of the missile sites. These individuals were vetted by the U.S. government to initiate World War III. I mean, if it had come to us having a war with the Soviets during the Cold War era, these persons would have turned keys, launched nuclear missiles that would have killed millions of Russians and Eastern Bloc allies of the Soviets. And so they were vetted psychologically. Their backgrounds were checked thoroughly before they were even put in those positions. Quite obviously very serious jobs. And yet over 150 now of these persons, either the launch officers, the maintenance officers, or the security guards, are now coming forward and saying UFO incursions at nuclear weapon sites, including the missile sites, are an ongoing thing. And on some occasions, when these incidents take place, the missiles malfunction. So I think we have to ask ourselves why this many of these individuals, we have scores and scores of persons who the U.S. government entrusted with starting World War III, or at least guarding the missiles that would have started World War III, who are now saying that UFOs exist. They're monitoring our missiles, and they're even interfering with functionality. I mean, clearly something real and something very serious is going on.
Another thing, too, that I've wondered is when these craft show up and turn everything off, if the high brass in the military is saying, okay, push the button, and these guys are pushing the buttons and nothing's happening. I mean, when do they finally give up and say, okay, well, didn't work, so we'll just move on?
But could you say that again? I'm not sure of the point you just made.
Okay, because I've talked to people before that have said, this gentleman by the name of Scott, I can't remember his last name, but he had some information about how when these UFOs would go over these nuclear silos, these missile silos, and turn everything off, they were doing it oftentimes because the military brass at the top levels were telling people at that facility to push the button, right? We're push the button, send the nukes out. And so
no, I don't. That's not credible. I'm unaware. I mean, I've interviewed dozens of these people. That does not even sound remotely plausible to me. We've not been in a position where, to my knowledge, and again, my sources go on the record. They allow their names to be used. I've vetted them. I have their service records. Not one of these guys has ever mentioned any kind of scenario such as you've just described. Now, unfortunately,
well, that's good to hear. I'm glad to hear
the
that.
internet being what it is, you have to separate the signal from the noise. You have to separate the credible information from the BS. And unfortunately, there are stories out there online from, quote, military veterans, usually anonymous persons. We don't know who they are. We don't know that they were actually in the military. We don't have any way to vet them, making very outrageous claims about UFO activity involving military sites. I think it's self-evident that each of us, when we read something online or see a video, we need to ask ourselves what the credibility level of that particular story or video is. And I can tell you what you've just described, the information that was provided to you doesn't sound plausible or credible to me.
Certainly the internet is like a bathroom wall. You can write anything about anyone at any time. And sometimes when I bring that up, I will often finish up with the word bonjour. Because if you've seen that commercial where this lady is waiting for her date that she met on the internet, she's talking to her friend about how he's a supermodel from France. And when he shows up, you can definitely tell he's not French and most likely not a supermodel. And she's like, well, you can't tell any lies on the internet, so it's got to be true. And he meets her and he goes, bonjour. So I can definitely see that. And that's one of the nice things about the Leak Project is we interview people from all different aspects and different sides of the coin so we can hear all the information presented. And oftentimes what people say or discuss, they may not have the sources that other people do. So I certainly appreciate you bringing that up. And I would like to add to that with times that we've been close in the past, like with the Cold War, there was a few times that the doomsday clock was almost at midnight. And I've talked to insiders now that the information that they can give me, they say we're actually closer now to worldwide war than we were even in the Cold War. So What is your take on the possibility of maybe there were times in the past where they got real close to that nuclear annihilation? And do you think that the flying saucers or the UFO presence had something to do with there not being World War III during the Cold War?
Well, in my book, again, it's available at ufohastings.com on my book page. Don't go to Amazon if you're interested in the book, because I don't sell it there. Scalpers would charge you $100 for it. If you go to my website, it's $24.95. In any case, in my book, I have a chapter called Lucky So Far. And there are 20 incidents that either the American or the Russian government have admitted to following the end of the Cold War, in where we or they were minutes away from World War III. Most people have heard of the Cuban Missile Crisis. We know there was a 2-week period in October of '62 where it appeared that there may have been full-scale nuclear war between us and the Soviets. What most people don't know, Americans and people around the globe, is that the US and the Russian governments have since admitted there were at least 20 incidents where we thought the Russians were about to launch, and so we were preparing to launch, or vice versa. And at the last minute, it was found to be some sort of computer glitch or some misinterpretation of communications or something, human-based. But I'm unaware involving any of those incidents, with the possible exception of the Cuban Missile Crisis, where there was an indication that UFOs were at the ready, so to speak, whoever were piloting them, and prepared to intervene during those 19 other incidents. On the other hand, the Cuban Missile Crisis, back in 2005, I interviewed a retired U.S. Air Force jet engine mechanic named Chris Smith. He had indicated he was at Loring Air Force Base during the Cuban Missile Crisis. It was a B-52 bomber base. The B-52s carry nuclear weapons, of course. And he said they were at their missile or their bomber jet engine shop, the mechanical shops, and they got a emergency call, claxons blaring, people running, trucks, gearing up to go to the flight line. All he knew was there was some sort of mid-air emergency involving 2 B-52s, which were flying out over the Atlantic Ocean in big circles. If President Kennedy had said, okay, it's war, then those bombers would have turned north, gone over the North Pole, and bombed targets in the Soviet Union. Until the presidential order came down, they were just basically flying big circles over the Atlantic. Well, apparently, according to Chris Smith, there was some sort of mid-air emergency not defined, and so they all raced down to the flight line to see what was going on. He said that the first bomber came in for a landing. As the second one was about to come in, they all noticed, everybody on the flight line, hundreds of people, noticed directly overhead a huge, what he described as a cigar-shaped object, appeared in the sky over Loring Air Force Base. He said it was so large you could have parked every aircraft on the base inside of it. It was just huge, perhaps 1 mile or 2 miles in length. Everyone was dumbfounded. Everyone was stunned. He said that this object hovered there silently. The second bomber landed, and then the object left at a fairly good speed. They could see it traveling to the east and out of sight. Now, I interviewed his jet engine partner, who I'm not at liberty to identify, the man who was the other team member on his jet engine team. And that person would not deny what Chris said, but he would not confirm it. He did not want to elaborate on it. He got very nervous when I talked about it. And so what you have, again, and I have Chris Smith's military records, of course. I know he was at Loring in '62 during the Cuban Missile Crisis. You have this mechanic reporting that something very bizarre, very important took place involving UFOs at the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis. I have, over the last decade, tried unsuccessfully to find out if there were any other incidents at any other Air Force bases, missile sites during the Cuban Missile Crisis. I've implored Air Force veterans who see my interviews, hear my interviews, to come forward if they were aware of a UFO-related incident in October '62 during this very dangerous period of history. So far, other than Chris Smith's jet engine mechanic partner, no one else has come forward and talked about this. But it's ongoing. There's another incident that I cover in my film, which again is available at Vimeo on demand. The film's called UFOs and Nukes, The Secret Link Revealed. We have 2 other Air Force officers talking about a missile launch at Vandenberg Air Force Base in California in September of '64, which was captured on film. They were using a high-powered telescope camera to film these launches, to evaluate engine performance and other aspects of a given launch as these missiles went out over the Pacific Ocean. And 2 officers, a then Lieutenant Robert Jacobs and a then Major Florence Mansman, have independently said that on this one launch, we think on September 15th, but certainly in the fall of 1964. When they evaluated the film back at the base, they found that as the dummy nuclear warhead separated from this missile and was downrange about 500 miles, but still quite clear, visible in this frame, a disc-shaped object with a dome appeared in the camera frame, circled the dummy nuclear warhead, and according to both officers, fired 4 different laser-like beams of light at the object and the warhead, whereupon the warhead fell in the Pacific Ocean, 100 miles short of its target. The UFO then retraced its steps, left the camera frame, and went apparently back into space. So the implication is that not only can UFOs can come and hover above missiles in their underground missile silos and disable them, but they're actually capable of flying alongside of them in suborbit, in space as they're traveling several thousand miles per hour, and disable them in space as they're actually heading toward their target. In the film, again, Jacobs is interviewed at length. Mr. Mansman is now deceased, but his written correspondence about the incident is also presented in the film. So it does seem as if, on at least a small scale, whoever are flying these craft are able to disable them if, in fact, we launch them or the Russians launch missiles against us. But the question remains, can they, if we launch 1,000 missiles and the Soviets, or the Russians rather, launch 1,000 missiles, can those aboard the UFO actually cope with that kind of large-scale situation? We simply don't know.
Now, if you look through some of the more recent cases, what's the most recent that you've actually had an opportunity to hear about?
I mentioned earlier the incident at F.E. Warren Air Force Base in 2010. That was October 23rd and 4th of 2010, involving this communications disruption in Wyoming. And the actual missile sites were in western Nebraska, just across the Wyoming line. That's the latest incident that I know about that the testimony is based on military personnel going on the record. I have interviewed civilians who live in the missile field. They actually have ranches with missile sites on their property up near Great Falls, Montana, at the Malmstrom Missile Field, who've talked to me about ongoing UFO activity within the last year or two. I have a small group of civilians who know of my interests, know of my research, and they've agreed to contact me whenever something's happening in their area. And I've gotten calls, for example, from Hilger, Montana, quite near one of the missile flights, the Oscar missile flight, that was involved with the 1967 shutdown incidents that we were talking about when the interview began here. The gentleman who talks to me up there when things were happening said that he was sitting watching TV one evening and his whole house started shaking, didn't know what was going on, ran outside and found a military helicopter, Air Force helicopter, at very low altitude, flying over his house, causing everything to shake. And he watched it for a few seconds and realized that about 100 yards in front of the helicopter was what he called an orb, a spherical-shaped object, apparently small in size, maybe the size of a basketball, or perhaps twice or 3 times that diameter, but certainly not a large craft. But it was luminous, it was glowing white, and it was quite clearly being pursued by this military helicopter, which could not catch it. And he watched this amazing sight as both the object and the helicopter went into the distance. So those are the kinds of reports that I'm getting most recently. I make a point, unless it's absolutely unavoidable, not to talk to active duty Air Force veterans, because I don't want to ruin anyone's military career. I don't want someone to get in trouble because they've talked to me about this.
That's definitely understandable. Now, what has it done for you after researching all of these people? Has it changed your perspective on the ET phenomenon?
I do think that these craft are being flown by non-human entities. I don't know who they are, where they're from, how they get here, why they would be interested in human affairs. I think probably what we call UFOs have been around for thousands of years. They probably have bases here somewhere on Earth from which they operate. This is speculation on my part. Obviously, I don't think they suddenly became interested in mankind at the beginning of the nuclear age. But it's clear to me, based on just the radar data alone, you have hundreds of reports from military radar operators, some in document form that have now been declassified, many are still classified, where objects capable of flying thousands of miles per hour, instantaneously stopping in midair or doing right-angle turns at high rates of speed, have been tracked by military radar all over the world. These simply cannot be military aircraft. from any country on Earth. Therefore, I believe we have an outside third party, probably ETs. And based on the testimony I've gotten from all of my veteran sources over the years, it's clear that whatever they're up to, whatever their overall agenda is and timetable for our planet and our species, one of the things they are quite directly involved in on an ongoing basis is their monitoring and tampering with American and Russian nuclear weapons. We haven't really talked yet about that. The fact that there are documents now in the public domain that were smuggled out of Russia by a journalist named George Knapp in 1993. He interviewed a number of former Soviet military personnel, one of whom, Colonel Sokolov, gave him, amazingly enough, still classified reports about a UFO activating a group of nuclear missiles in Soviet Ukraine on October 4th, 1982. And according to the document that Knapp amazingly smuggled out and had translated several years ago, down in the launch capsule at this nuclear missile base, for 15 seconds, the missiles went into launch mode, countdown mode, and were preparing to launch as far as the launch officers knew. And they were terrified. And at the same time this was happening, other personnel were describing this huge disc-shaped object hovering directly over the base. And all of this is in the documents that Knapp brought to the United States. According to the Soviet military, they could find no cause, no prosaic reason for these anomalous missile activations. At 15 seconds, everything did return to normal. The missiles did not launch, but it was clearly a UFO-related incident at a Soviet missile site. So again, the things that are happening in the U.S. were also happening in the Soviet Union during the Cold War era. We seem to have, whoever they are, they're not playing favorites. They're monitoring and tampering with both American and Russian nuclear weapons.
Now, also, I saw a little clip on your YouTube channel that shows this red laser coming out of these UFOs and hitting the targets, almost like it was scanning or something like that. So what do you think that laser was used for?
The gentleman who described that incident to me is a retired major named Galen King. He was at Ellsworth Air Force Base in South Dakota. He believed the incident took place in the summer of '66. There were a number of incidents involving UFO activity at the missile sites. He described to me two of his security alert teams racing out to a missile silo. Alarms had gone off at that silo indicating something was amiss. Galen King was one of the launch officers back at the launch capsule. I believe he said Echo Flight. Anyway, he was underground and listening to the guards proceeding to the silo to see what was causing these alarms. Galen King says, in my film on camera, what you've seen is a trailer where he's discussing all of this, but it is in the film itself, where he's saying that the guards called back and said, sir, for lack of a better term, there's a flying saucer hovering above that missile and there's a red light going down to it. And as he got further information from the guards, they were describing something more like a laser, a very thin beam, not like a searchlight of any kind, that was directly falling from the UFO onto the capsule, onto the silo lid rather. Galen King, the launch officer, said there was no damage to the missile in that particular case. It did not malfunction. He would have known about that back at the launch capsule on his console. There would have been an indication of some kind of malfunction. In that case, apparently there was no disruption of the functionality of the missile. Galen says on camera that it had to be some sort of analysis. He said they probably analyzed the warhead, quote unquote. So there are variations on the kinds of incidents that are taking place, but that one, as illustrated in my film, is based on the testimony of this retired Air Force major.
Now, have you actually seen anything doing these interviews and stuff? I've talked to people before. Matter of fact, I talked to Preston Dennett yesterday, and he's got about 30 years of UFO research, talked to many people that have actually been abducted. You know, he's on a little bit of a different path, but very similar. And he writes in one of his books about how once he started doing this research, then he himself started seeing things. And he calls it the UFO disease because he tended to notice more anomalies in the sky and stuff as well. So has it changed like what you have seen? Have you had any encounters that you were like, wow, this is X-Files kind of stuff?
I've seen, I would say 8 or 9 objects at this point. I would have to go through the incidents one by one and add them up. But beginning in college, I believe it was 1970, I saw a glowing sphere moving just above treetop level, meandering through the trees and going off into the distance. I've also seen what appeared to be saucer-shaped craft in New Mexico in the sky far away, fairly far away, but as far as I could tell, they were circular in shape. In Albuquerque one time with a group of people, I saw what appeared to be a silver cigar-shaped object in broad daylight. It didn't have any exhaust or tail fins or anything like a cruise missile would have. So again, I have seen probably, I believe, 8 or 9 of these objects that I could not identify as conventional aircraft. I grew up on military bases. I never lived anywhere but on Air Force bases until I went away to college. I know what aircraft look like. I know what they look like on in various atmospheric and lighting conditions. These objects were not aircraft. I'm also an amateur astronomer. I know what stars and planets look like. I can tell you where most of the planets are on any given night just because of my familiarity with the databases. I've seen meteors, I've seen bolide meteors, and again, the objects that I saw, the ones I've described to you, clearly were not prosaic phenomena such as astronomical objects or conventional aircraft. I can't say that I believe that my sightings have any direct bearing or result from my UFO research. The first ones I had were in college before I really began actively interviewing these veterans. So there was already, a pattern of sightings before I got involved. I look at the sky a lot. I love clouds. I love stars. I love just natural phenomena. So I probably look up at the sky more than the average person, and I would attribute that fact to the fact that I've seen a number of these objects, as opposed to most people who are looking at the ground or the traffic in front of them.
Oh, yeah, or Naked and Afraid on TV. That's the new craze for many of these people. But regardless, I got to tell you, Richard, you are just a plethora of information, and I would recommend our listeners go to ufohastings.com if you want to purchase the book UFOs and Nukes, Extraordinary Encounters at Nuclear Weapons Sites. You can also pick that up on the website, and then go to Vimeo. Give us the link again for Vimeo for the movie.
The documentary film is at vimeo.com/on-demand/UFOs and Nukes. And you can either rent the film or buy it, which means unlimited downloads. It's been very well received. It's gotten rave reviews. It's really the culmination of the research I've done. An Albuquerque businessman named Jared Tarbell and his wife Lori have been very supportive of my work. They paid for the film over $150,000. The only reason it exists is because they, like me, believe that the public deserves to have this information. And so I am actually in Jared's studio at the moment doing this interview. If someone doesn't want to buy my book, if they don't want to buy the video, then they can go to my website and read one or more of my articles for free. And I think they will be impressed with the quality of the information. These are vetted military witnesses, or on my documents page, declassified documents which have been authenticated. It was not some prankster typing up in his basement and putting it online. These all came directly from government agencies. So the information on my website is credible, it's documented. I believe public education is essential to all of us being aware of what's going on. I don't expect the government to come clean anytime soon. People who claim that disclosure is just around the corner, I think they're engaged in wishful thinking. There's no evidence to support that belief. I've been hearing stories like that since the 1970s. No government has anything to gain. They have everything to lose by acknowledging that this is going on, this is real. The impact, the potential implications for humankind, from a religious point of view, social point of view. Stock market could collapse if this is announced and some people freak out. No government's going there voluntarily. I think the phenomenon itself is going to have to kick it up to another level. They're going to have to do some sort of ostentatious worldwide display and let us all know this is happening, because Washington and Moscow aren't going to tell us about it. So again, I think the best thing that we can do, the average person, is to educate oneself at the grassroots level. If you go to my website, whether you buy the book or purchase the film or just read the articles, if you think it's credible, send the link to my website to 10 other people and ask those 10 people to send it to 10 people. And slowly but surely the word will get out.
And when you had CNN actually stream that live when you talk to the military personnel, that's pretty darn close to disclosure, in my opinion. They're never going to come out and say, yes, there are aliens. But the fact that they actually did that, I think that that's a step in the right direction. Now, they might have tried to spin it and only show certain parts and come out with commercials at specific times. And there's many things they can do to not get the point across, or at least push their agenda. However, that in and of itself, I think, is pretty cool, right?
Well, again, that really wasn't from the government per se. It was from a news network. But yes, I have to say that The co-sponsor of my press conference, former Air Force captain named Robert Salas, who was involved in one of these missile shutdown incidents at Malmstrom Air Force Base in 1967. He and I were frankly surprised that CNN showed up at the last minute and agreed to live stream the whole press conference. Again, it is available in its entirety. It's a little more than an hour in length at ufohastings.com, but you can actually see the 7 of these military veterans going on the record talking about UFO activity at nuclear weapons sites. But much to my disappointment, even though the story, the press conference, the dramatic testimony from these veterans did get worldwide play through CNN and other major networks around the world, other major news organizations covered it, CBS News, NBC News, ABC News, Fox, very conservative network, covered us very objectively. We were quite impressed and happy with the level and the objectivity of the coverage we were getting. But within a week, it all died down. It was as if it never happened. We were hoping that some investigative journalist from somewhere in some country on planet Earth would realize this is worth following up on and would contact these veterans and interview them at length. That did not happen. It was almost as if, this was a one-day story or a one-week story. Now we're moving on to something else. I don't think that the mainstream media gets it. They don't understand that this is not a story that you squeeze in if it's a slow news day. It's a major story. We have nuclear weapons in here, the U.S. and the former Soviet Union being shut down by unknown entities capable of doing feats that we can't, and flying craft that are technologically orders of magnitude beyond what we have. Clearly, that's more than a one-day or a one-week story, and yet it died off. And again, that's almost 6 years ago that took place, and you won't see much serious news about UFOs on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis in the mainstream media, certainly.
Well, that's because people have to watch their latest sitcom and sporting event or reality depression TV show. Or they have to go on social media and type about what's going to be for dinner and, just project all these selfies of themselves while they're eating a steak or something. It's really fascinating times that we live in, and I really enjoyed watching the people that actually were interviewed on that video, because I did watch it, and it's like these guys they're very mature, they're intellectual. You can tell that they don't have the, how do I put this? They're just very normal, you know what I mean? They're not like somebody that's out there with blue hair and their ears pierced and all these tattoos all over their body saying, yo, man, I saw some UFOs out there. It's just like these guys were trained by the military, and you can tell that they're very credible sources. So I just really appreciate that. And we've only got a few minutes left, so I just wanted to ask you one more question before we close out tonight, Robert, and thank you so much for coming on the show with us. Planet X, and I'm asking you this because you mentioned that you're an astronomer. Planet X seems to be on millions of people's minds right now, and it's been talked about since, you can go all the way back to the 50s, I'm sure. They've got old school articles about Planet X being found somewhere in the solar system. Supposedly it's talked about in the Bible and the Sumerian tablets and other things, yet I'm still agnostic, but I've noticed that the sun itself is a lot more intense than it was 15 years ago, 20 years ago. It seems a lot brighter, wider, larger. You can see chemtrails being blasted in the atmosphere constantly, and I do know the difference between a contrail and a chemtrail based on commercial flights, etc. So do you think that there is like this second sun approaching, or what's going on with the strange stuff outside of the Earth? What are you seeing?
Well, you mentioned I'm an astronomer. I'm actually just an amateur astronomer. I went to university to be an astronomer, and then I flunked calculus and decided to go another direction. But in any case, I'm very conservative in the way I approach this. I am not personally convinced that chemtrails exist as anything real or independent of contrails. I'm aware of the Zacharias Sitchin, let's call it, account of what his interpretations of ancient Sumerian tablets reveal in terms of a race of beings from another planet in the solar system that has a very erratic, very elliptical orbit and only approaches Earth in long duration period. I'm aware of all of that, but I'm unable to convince myself there's enough credible information to verify the reality of all of that. I've tried to keep it to the nuts and bolts. I'm talking about radar data. I'm talking about credible, vetted military witnesses who are talking about pattern of activity at nuclear weapon sites. All of this can be established in a court of law as being real beyond a reasonable doubt. I'm interested in various aspects of the UFO phenomenon. I'm interested in the abduction phenomenon, although that's not my area of study. I've met people through the years I consider very credible who have described having these kinds of experiences. I believe there is something to it that can't be explained away as the skeptics try to do. as being something psychological or suggestive or whatever. But again, I can only talk about what I know. When I go public, it's to discuss something that I have researched personally. I haven't taken anyone's word for it. I have documents confirming what the veterans are saying. I have multiple individuals talking about a single incident, for example, beyond a reasonable doubt. The type of information that's being provided would hold up in a court of law to prove this, that, or the other. So people are welcome to believe what they will relating to UFOs. I would simply say there are liars out there. There are charlatans. There are persons who are psychologically unbalanced. They can type stuff into a keyboard and it ends up in cyberspace. You need to be very careful when you go to a given website and someone makes a claim. You need to ask yourself, unless you're just really dumb and you don't mind being taken advantage of, ask yourself what the credibility of this person is. What are his or her statements being based on? Have they vetted the witnesses? Are they presenting information in the public that you can independently verify that they've vetted those witnesses? Don't just take their word for it. You owe it to yourself as an intelligent person to ask all of these questions before you accept the validity of anything anyone says on the internet. There are people that just like spooky stories. The spookier the better. They don't care what the credibility of the information is. That's fine, but you really shouldn't buy into that unless that's what turns you on. If you're looking for the truth, if you're looking for facts, what I call the signal, not the noise, then you really need to vet your own information, anything that's presented to you online.
I'm glad you brought that up, because to close out tonight, the movie Independence Day #2 is coming out today, Insurgents. And in that film, you can tell they're really pushing this fear factor of ETs. You've got these giant spaceships coming to blow up different cities and stuff. And with the information that you've brought to the table, it sounds like the exact opposite, because with the technologies that these UFOs do have that people have seen with their own eyes, very credible sources, they're way above and beyond any of the stuff that we know about, at least currently. So it'd be very easy for them, in my opinion, to wipe us out, unless there's ways that we can overcome that technology. So it's probably the opposite. So I really am glad that you brought that up for us. And once again, folks, I'd recommend going to UFOhastings.com. Check out UFOs and Nukes, Extraordinary Encounters at Nuclear Weapon Sites by Robert Hastings. Also, folks, check out our website, eliteproject.com. We have exclusive content on there, updated every single day, sometimes 2, 3, 4 podcasts in a single day. YouTube.com/Clandestine Time Lord. If you subscribe, you'll have access to the latest podcasts first and free. Thank you for joining us, folks. This is Rex Bear. Be the change you want to see. Good night. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this edition of Leak Project. I am your host, Rex Bear, and we have Robert Hastings with us, who has spent more than 40 years researching and seeking information of UFOs. He has interviewed former and retired U.S. Air Force personnel regarding their direct or indirect involvement in nuclear weapons-related UFO incidents. These individuals, ranging in rank and position, report extraordinary encounters which have obvious national security implications. In fact, taken to their logical conclusion, these cases have planetary implications given the horrific consequences that would result from a full-scale global nuclear war. To date, Hastings has interviewed more than 150 military veterans who were involved in various UFO-related incidents at U.S. missile sites, weapons storage facilities, and nuclear bomb test ranges. These events were described by these individuals leave little doubt that the U.S. nuclear weapons program is an ongoing source of interest to someone possessing vastly superior technology. Now, on September 27, 2010, Hastings hosted the UFO Nukes Connection press conference at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., during which 7 U.S. Air Force veterans discussed UFO incursions at nuclear weapons sites during the Cold War era, and CNN even streamed this event live. Now, the full-length video is available at UFOhastings.com. It's awesome to have you on the show with us, Robert, here at the Leak Project. How the heck are you?
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Now, we're going to pick your brain as much as we can here over the next 60 minutes. I first found out about UFOs hovering over missile silos and turning off their facility, essentially, about 5 years ago. I found some stuff on the web about it. So this is fascinating to me. The official story was these discs came over this facility and then all of a sudden it turned off, but they didn't really give any other details. So this is going to be really great to find out more about this. But if you would, please tell our audience just a little bit about yourself, and then we'll segue into the work.
My father was career Air Force, and in 1966-67, we lived at Malmstrom Air Force Base, Montana, which is a nuclear missile base. He worked in a facility called the SAGE building, which was basically state-of-the-art radar, connecting with other radar installations around the U.S. that would technically try to prevent Soviet aircraft incursions in North America if, in fact, World War III began. In any case, these very sophisticated radars were picking up unknown aerial objects in the spring of 1967. According to the radar personnel, these objects were flying at enormous velocities. They were doing zigzag maneuvers. They were occasionally stopping and hovering in midair, things that no aircraft can do even today. And beyond that, apparently the targets correlated with missile sites. These unknown aerial objects were hovering above underground nuclear missile silos. This was a very pervasive rumor among personnel at the SAGE building. I heard the rumor from my father. I was aware that something odd was going on, but we didn't quite know what. It was technically classified. However, in 1973, after I left college, I graduated from university, there was information published for the first time by a man named Raymond Fowler, a UFO researcher who also happened to be working for the Minuteman missile program via the Sylvania Corporation. And Fowler published information in a book called Interplanetary Visitors, in which he said his contacts at Malmstrom Air Force Base were telling him, as the Minuteman project manager at Sylvania Corporation, that UFOs were hovering over the missiles and the missiles were malfunctioning. That, in essence, not only confirmed what I had heard back in '67, but took it a step further, indicating not only were these objects flying around and hovering above the missiles, but according to Fowler, they in fact were impacting the functionality of the missiles. So quite quickly, I concluded this was very real, this was very important. I began voluntarily just actively seeking out former military personnel, veterans, to see if anyone else could corroborate these kinds of stories that we were hearing. And over time, through the course of the '70s, I successfully interviewed probably close to 30 former and retired Air Force missile personnel who were describing incidents that they were personally involved in, either as security personnel or missile maintenance personnel, in some cases missile targeting personnel, missile launch personnel, all of whom said this indeed has been going on, not only at Malmstrom, but other missile bases, where the security guards at ground level report a saucer-shaped object racing in at blinding speed, instantaneously stopping and hovering over either one of these launch control capsules or one of the 10 missile silos that those capsules control, and seconds later, the missiles begin malfunctioning. Documents have now been released through the Freedom of Information Act to a number of researchers, which confirm that these incidents have in fact occurred, that there are UFO incursions at nuclear facilities of all kinds, according to the documents, extending back to the 1940s and continuing even to the present day. And I obviously think this is important because I believe the public needs to know the facts. I've spent 35 years on the college lecture circuit trying to acquaint people with this. I've written a 600-page book, which is available at ufohastings.com, summarizing the tape-recorded testimony of over 150 former Air Force personnel that I've interviewed, presenting the documents as well. And most recently, we've completed a documentary film, which is available at Vimeo On Demand, called UFOs and Nukes, The Secret Link Revealed. That is the latest effort on my part to acquaint the public with all of this information.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the book right now, UFOs and Nukes, Extraordinary Encounters at Nuclear Weapons Sites, and the amount of information that you've compiled is just incredible. One thing that I've wondered before is how far back do these sightings, when was the first sighting they had over one of these facilities?
Well, a year after my book was published in 2008, I was contacted by a U.S. Navy veteran. He's a former fighter pilot in World War II. And he told me that his squadron was posted at a place called Naval Air Station Pasco in Washington State. Across the river from that naval facility was the Hanford site, which was the plutonium production facility for the first atomic bombs the test in New Mexico, the Trinity test, the first detonation of an atomic bomb. The plutonium for that explosion came from the Hanford site, as did the plutonium for the Nagasaki bomb. The Hiroshima bomb, on the other hand, was made from uranium. In any case, this Navy pilot named Bud Clem told me in 2009 that over approximately a 1-month period in January of 1945, several months before the end of the war, several months before Japan was bombed with the 2 atomic bombs, this man was saying that there were 3 separate UFO incursions at the Hanford site, and his squadron was assigned to, in effect, chase these objects away from this very sensitive top secret site. Now, this was prior to the era of jet aircraft. They were flying prop-driven planes, Hellcat fighters, as they were called. And he went into great detail, first on audio tape, and later I actually got him on videotape, describing all of this. In 2013, another researcher named Jan Aldrich was able to get documents from the 4th Army Group during World War II, based in the North